The house I grew up in was built on a foundation of stories, not concrete. Every scuff on the hardwood floor was from my brother's tricycle, every chip in the kitchen countertop was from my first attempt at making fudge, and the faint pencil marks on the doorframe in the hallway were a testament to my sister S and my growth, a race she was always winning in my parents' eyes. She was the brilliant, beautiful one, the one destined for a life of sparkling achievements. I was the other one, the quiet, steady one, the one who was just there. I was the reliable daughter, the one who got a sensible degree, a sensible job in a downtown office that my parents never bothered to understand, and lived a sensible, frugal life. My frugality, however, was not seen as a virtue. It was seen as a symptom of my failure to launch, a quiet confirmation that I simply wasn't capable of the kind of success my sister seemed to attract without effort. For the past year, I had amplified this narrative. I sold my newish car for an old beater that coughed to life every morning. I moved into a smaller apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. I spoke of rising rents and student loan payments, of having to choose between fixing my car's transmission and getting a root canal. My life, as I presented it to them, was a constant, grinding struggle. I would ask for small things, $100 to help with a utility bill, a little help with a sudden medical expense. The answer was always a sigh of disappointment from my father and a lecture on budgeting from my mother, followed by a gentle but firm no. "We have to be careful right now," my mother would say, her voice laced with a pained martyrdom. "Your sister's wedding is just around the corner and we want to give her the day she deserves." The day she deserved. It was a phrase that echoed through our family for a solid year, a mantra that justified every excess. My sister's wedding was not an event, it was a production, a coronation. She had a binder thicker than a phone book, filled with magazine clippings of dresses that cost more than my car, of floral arrangements that could feed a small country, of a destination venue on a vineyard that required a 3-day booking for the entire wedding party. My parents, who had lived a comfortable but by no means wealthy life, were mesmerized. They saw her ambition not as entitlement, but as a reflection of her inherent worth. My quiet struggle was an inconvenient footnote in the grand, expensive novel of her happiness. The breaking point, the moment the last thread of my filial devotion snapped, came on a Sunday afternoon. They had called me over for a family meeting. I walked into the old house, the smell of my mom's pot roast filling the air, a scent that used to mean comfort but now felt like a trap. My sister was there, glowing, a diamond the size of a small planet on her finger. They sat me down at the dining room table, the very table where I'd done my homework for 12 years, and they told me their wonderful news. They had found a way to make all of my sister's dreams come true. They were taking out a second mortgage on the house. This house. The house my grandfather had built with his own 2 hands, the house that held every single memory of my life, good and bad. They were leveraging our entire family history, our only significant asset, to pay for a 3-day party. I stared at them, my heart a cold, dead weight in my chest. I tried to reason with them. I spoke about interest rates, about the risk, about what would happen if my dad's contracting business had a slow year. I begged them to consider a smaller wedding, something they could afford. My sister started to cry, accusing me of being jealous and bitter. My father told me I didn't understand the joy of seeing one of your children truly happy. My mother looked at me with those familiar, disappointed eyes and said the words that would seal their fate. "We're sorry you're struggling, dear," she said, her voice dripping with pity. "But we can't sacrifice your sister's happiness just because you haven't been as fortunate." Fortunate, as if my life was the result of a bad roll of the dice, while my sister's was a divinely ordained victory. In that moment, sitting at that table, I was no longer their daughter. I was a stranger watching a family I no longer recognized sign its own death warrant. I didn't argue anymore. I just nodded, a strange calm settling over me. I congratulated my sister. I wished them all the best. I walked out of that house and I did not look back. They thought I was struggling. They had no idea that my sensible, boring job was as a senior analyst for a top-tier private equity firm, specializing in distressed debt acquisition. They had no idea that my struggle was a carefully constructed illusion, that I lived frugally not out of necessity, but because I was saving every penny, investing aggressively, and building a formidable amount of capital. I had hidden my success because I knew that to my family, my money would not be my own. It would be a resource for them to exploit, a fund to be funneled directly into the black hole of my sister's bottomless desires. They had just put their most prized possession on the market, and I, their unfortunate, struggling daughter, was about to become the highest bidder. They thought they were sacrificing their future for her. They had no idea they were selling it directly to me. The wedding was, by all accounts, a spectacle of borrowed splendor. I saw the pictures on social media, a relentless flood of professionally shot evidence of my family's financial suicide. There was my sister in a cloud of white lace, a dress that cost $30,000. There was my father, his face flushed with champagne and pride, making a speech in a rented tuxedo. There was my mother, weeping with joy as she watched the first dance under a canopy of imported orchids that probably cost more than my first year of college tuition. I attended, of course. I had to. I wore a simple dress I'd owned for years, a visual representation of my supposed hardship. I smiled my quiet, sad smile. I deflected questions about my life with vague answers about making ends meet. I endured my sister's pitying glances and my mother's whispered advice about finding a man to take care of me. Every moment was a new layer of fuel on the cold fire of my resolve. While they were dancing, I was on my phone in the bathroom, tracking the financial markets. While they were cutting the 5-tiered cake, I was reading the fine print on loan securitization agreements. They were celebrating a union. I was planning an acquisition. My work began the Monday after the wedding. Mortgages, especially second mortgages from smaller, more desperate lenders like the one my parents had used, are rarely held by the original issuer for long. They are commodities bundled up and sold off to larger institutions or investment firms. They become just another line on a spreadsheet, a debt to be collected. My job, the one my parents thought was little more than glorified data entry, had given me a unique and powerful skill set. I knew how to navigate the opaque world of debt markets. I knew how to trace the path of a loan from a local credit union to a faceless holding company in another state. It took me 3 weeks of meticulous, late-night work to find it. Their debt, the legal claim on my childhood home, was now owned by a mid-sized investment firm out of Delaware that specialized in high-risk residential loans. For them, my parents' home was not a home. It was a number, an asset with a predictable default rate. My next step was to create a buffer, a wall of anonymity. I used a portion of my carefully saved capital to form a limited liability company, or LLC. I gave it a boring, forgettable name, Midland Property Ventures. I filed the paperwork through an online service listing a registered agent in Wyoming, making the true ownership almost impossible to trace without a court order. Midland Property Ventures was a ghost, and it was about to become my parents' worst nightmare. With the LLC in place, I made my move. I didn't approach the Delaware firm as a daughter trying to save her family home. I approached them as a shrewd investor. Through a broker, my LLC made an offer to buy a small portfolio of their riskiest loans, a practice that is common in the industry. I made sure my parents' mortgage was buried in the list. My offer was aggressive. I offered to pay 70 cents on the dollar in cash for the entire bundle. To a firm like that, a cash offer that clears risky assets off their books is incredibly tempting. They get an immediate return and eliminate the possibility of a costly foreclosure process down the line. After a week of negotiation, they accepted. There was a mountain of paperwork, a series of wire transfers from my investment accounts to my LLC's business account and then to the seller. And then one Tuesday afternoon, a digital file transfer confirmed the transaction. It was done. Midland Property Ventures was now the legal holder of the note on my parents' house. I owned them. I owned the roof over their heads, the foundation my grandfather had laid, the doorframe with the pencil marks. The first payment was due in 2 weeks. I went to a graphic designer and had a new set of official-looking letterhead and payment slips created for Midland Property Ventures. The address was a P.O. box I had rented. The phone number was a new, untraceable burn phone. I mailed them their first bill myself. It was a cold, impersonal document detailing the new payment instructions and the severe penalties for late payment, all in stark legal terminology. A few days later, my mother called me. She was complaining. Some horrible new company bought our loan, she said, her voice dripping with indignation. They seem so ruthless, not like the nice man at the local bank. It all feels so cold. I murmured some empty words of sympathy. Well, Mom, I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand, that's just business. She had no idea. She was complaining to the CEO, the board of directors, and the entire collections department of that horrible new company. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for them to walk into it. It took 3 months. 3 months of my parents struggling to make the inflated mortgage payments, a direct consequence of the lavish wedding they had financed. The strain was evident. My father looked tired, the jovial pride he displayed at the wedding replaced by a constant, low-grade anxiety. My mother's complaints on the phone shifted from the coldness of the new loan company to the rising price of groceries and gas, the classic laments of people living on the financial edge. They never asked my sister for help. In their eyes, she was a newlywed building her own perfect life, and she was not to be burdened. I, the struggling daughter, was the one who got the worried phone calls, the one they vented to, never once imagining I was the source of their new, impersonal financial pressure. The first late payment was a milestone. It was only 2 days late, but the system I had put in place was mercilessly efficient. An automated call from a pre-recorded service informed them of their delinquency. A letter, printed on the stark letterhead of Midland Property Ventures, was dispatched, outlining the late fees that had been added to their principal. My mother called me frantic. They're charging us $75 for being 2 days late. It's robbery. I let her vent, offering a clucking tongue of sympathy. These national companies are all the same, Mom, they have no heart. The second late payment was a week late. This time they received a call not from a recording but from a person, a third-party collections agent I had hired, a man with a gravelly voice and no patience, who spoke to them about their contractual obligations. That call was followed by a certified letter, a notice of intent to foreclose, a document filled with terrifying legal phrases that I had drafted myself using templates from my day job. The panic began to set in. They had nowhere to turn. They had exhausted their savings for the wedding. My father's business was hitting a slow patch. My sister, when they finally gently broached the subject of a small loan, gave them a tearful story about her own expenses, the new furniture, the planned trip to Europe. Her dream life, it turned out, did not include bailing out the parents who had paid for it, so they came to me. It was another Sunday. They showed up at my small, shabby apartment unannounced. They saw the peeling paint, the mismatched furniture, the life of struggle I had so carefully curated. This, in their minds, confirmed my inability to help, but they were desperate. They sat on my lumpy sofa, their faces etched with fear and shame. My father, a man who had never once admitted weakness to me, couldn't look me in the eye as he explained the situation. They were 2 months behind. The foreclosure process had started. They were going to lose the house. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, the apex of their hypocrisy. "We know you don't have much," my mother said, her voice cracking as she took my hand. "But we have nowhere else to go. Could you possibly spare anything? Even a few $1,000s would show the bank we're trying." They were asking me, their unfortunate daughter, to bail them out of a disaster they had created to fund the extravagant fantasy of their perfect daughter. The cold knot of resolve in my stomach tightened into steel. I looked at my parents, at their desperate, pleading faces, and I felt nothing. The hurt had burned away, leaving only a chilling clarity. "I can't give you a loan," I said, my voice flat. I saw the hope drain from their eyes. "But," I continued, standing up, "I will meet you at the house this evening. There's something we need to discuss. I might have a solution." They left my apartment clinging to that one sliver of hope. That evening I drove to the house. I didn't drive my old beater. I took a car service. I walked up the path to the front door, not as their struggling daughter, but as the owner of Midland Property Ventures. I found them in the dining room, sitting at the table, looking small and defeated. I didn't sit down. I placed my leather briefcase on the table and clicked it open. I took out a thick file folder and laid it in front of them. It was the foreclosure paperwork. "This is the solution," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. My father stared at the papers. "We've already seen these," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "We don't understand." I looked him directly in the eye. "You don't understand because you've never looked," I said. "You never looked past the stories you told yourselves, the story about the brilliant daughter and the one who was struggling. You see this company name, Midland Property Ventures?" They both nodded, their faces a mask of confusion. "I am Midland Property Ventures," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so profound that I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the same sound I had fallen asleep to for 18 years. Then I laid it all out, my job, my savings. My investments, the LLC, the purchase of their debt. I spared them no detail. I was not their daughter explaining a misunderstanding. I was a creditor outlining the terms of their default to a pair of delinquent clients. My mother began to sob, a low, guttural sound of disbelief and betrayal. My father just stared, his face pale, his mind visibly struggling to connect the struggling girl from the shabby apartment with the cold, calculating woman standing before him. "Why?" He finally managed to ask. "Because you made a choice," I said, my voice as sharp as broken glass. "You looked at your 2 daughters and you decided one's fantasy was worth more than our family's future, more than our family's home. You mortgaged this house for a party. You dismissed my struggles, real or not, because they were inconvenient to the story you wanted to tell. This isn't revenge. This is an outcome, a business decision, the same kind you made when you signed those papers." I let the words hang in the air. I had taken the power. I had taken the house. Now I would give them their terms. "You will not be losing your home," I said, and a flicker of desperate hope returned to their eyes. "You will be renting it from me. You will pay me fair market rent on time every month. And your other daughter, the one this house was sacrificed for, she will be co-signing the lease. Her perfect life will now include the responsibility of paying for the consequences of her desires. This is the deal, or you can be out in 30 days. They had no choice. They had backed themselves into a corner, and I was the only one holding the key. I was no longer the quiet, overlooked daughter. I was their landlord, their banker, the final authority on the foundation of their lives. They lost a daughter that day, the one they thought they knew, but they gained a valuable, if painful, lesson in the true cost of their choices. Thanks listening this story. Now I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. Share this story with your friends and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Revenge Laura for more episodes.